Did you know that the most famous vampire movie ever made almost didn't happen? It's true. Back in 1958, when Dracula first appeared on screen in this incredible British film, nobody knew it would change horror forever. The people who made it were working with old cameras, strange tricks, and a lot of fear. But here's the amazing part. All those strange choices and weird behind-the-scenes stories are what made this movie so unforgettable. From the blood they used on set to the actor who was genuinely terrified, this film is packed with secrets that fans still don't know about today. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about Dracula. Fact number 20. The blood was real. When you watch Dracula drink blood, it looks absolutely real and terrifying. But here's the thing. The filmmakers had to be very creative about what they actually used. They couldn't use real human blood for safety reasons, so they mixed up something special in their kitchen. The recipe included corn syrup, red food coloring, and other ingredients we might find in our grandmother's pantry. The problem was that corn syrup was very expensive in Britain during that time, so the budget got tight really fast. The actors had to drink this fake blood over and over again during filming, and many of them got sick from the sugar. Christopher Lee, who played Dracula, said later that he would taste that awful mixture in his dream. What looked like real horror on screen actually tasted like a very bad dessert. It looked terrifying, but it was actually quite silly behind the camera. Fact number 19. Christopher Lee never got to say his famous line. This is one of the strangest facts about this entire movie. Christopher Lee is the actor who played the vampire. He's absolutely incredible in this role. But here's the weird part. Barely has any dialogue in the whole film. In fact, Lee only speaks for about 3 minutes total in the entire movie. Most of the film, he just stares, moves slowly, and looks dangerous without saying much of anything. Other actors do all the talking while Christopher Lee creates terror just by being on screen. Later, Christopher Lee said he was disappointed about this. He felt like he had so much more to show us, so many words to say. But the director believed that silence was scarier than any words could ever be. The director was right, because Christopher Lee's quiet presence became one of the most terrifying performances in all of horror history. Sometimes saying nothing is more powerful than saying everything. Fact number 18. The castle was made of cardboard and paint. When you watch Dracula's castle in this film, it looks massive and real and absolutely impossible to escape from. But if you could walk behind the camera, you would discover something shocking. The castle was mostly made of painted cardboard and wooden frames. The filmmakers had very little money to spend, so they got creative. They painted shadows on flat pieces of material to make them look three-dimensional. They used clever camera angles to make small sets look huge. They built doors that didn't actually lead anywhere. Some of the stone walls were just painted cloth hanging from the ceiling. The special effects team was like a group of magicians using tricks instead of real materials. They understood that what the audience saw mattered more than what was actually there. Every shadow was painted exactly right. Every angle was chosen perfectly. The camera never showed us the truth. What looked like a real Gothic castle was actually an artist's beautiful lie. It was fake, but it looked absolutely real. Fact number 17. Peter Cushing had real fear during filming. Peter Cushing played Professor Van Helsing, the brave man who fights against Dracula. Cushing was a professional actor with years of experience, but something about working with Christopher Lee made him feel real fear. Part of this was because Lee was so tall and so committed to his role. Lee would stay in character even between takes, staring at Cushing with those intense eyes. But there was something else that made Cushing nervous too. The filmmakers used real weapons and real sharp objects on set for the vampire hunting scenes. There were no rubber props or fake swords. Everything was genuine and dangerous. During the final battle scene, Cushing had to dodge real crosses and real weapons while Christopher Lee moved toward him like a true monster. Cushing didn't know exactly when Lee would move or how close he would get. The fear in his eyes during those scenes was not completely acting. It was a mixture of acting and real worry about getting hurt. This real fear made his performance absolutely powerful. When you watch him fight Dracula, you're watching genuine terror mixed with real courage. That wasn't just acting, it was real danger caught on film. Fact number 16. The director used a technique from silent films. When Terence Fisher directed Dracula, he remembered watching silent films from many years before. In those old silent movies, filmmakers couldn't use sound, so they had to tell stories with visual tricks and camera movements. Fisher decided to use some of those ancient techniques in his new horror film. He used specific camera angles that made spaces look bigger or smaller than they really were. He used shadows and light in ways that silent film pioneers had discovered decades earlier. He used the camera to move in ways that created emotions without any words. The mixture of old techniques and new technology created something magical. The film looks modern, but it feels like it comes from the distant past. Young filmmakers studying Dracula today often discover that Fisher was using techniques from the 1910s and 1920s. He was borrowing from film history and making it feel fresh and terrifying. What could have been a simple horror movie became art because the director understood the power of old filmmaking tricks. Old tools with new magic created something nobody had ever seen before. Fact number 15. The werewolf scene was removed at the last minute. In the original script for Dracula, there was a scene where a werewolf would appear. This werewolf would transform on screen during a dramatic moment. The special effects team spent weeks creating the werewolf costume and planning how to film the transformation. They practiced the scene multiple times. They tested the costume under the film lights. They were ready to create something that had never been done before. But just before filming that scene, the studio decided to remove it. The budget was running out, and they worried the werewolf didn't fit the story perfectly. The effects team had to watch their weeks of work disappear completely. The werewolf costume was put in storage. The transformation scene was removed from the script. To this day, nobody has ever seen that werewolf on screen. Film historians have looked for photographs or footage of that lost monster, but nothing exists. Werewolf remains a ghost story about Dracula itself. What could have been a groundbreaking special effects moment was erased from cinema history. Sometimes even the best ideas end up on a cutting room floor. Number 14. The vampire had to get taller. Christopher Lee is already a very tall man. He stands over 6 feet high, which is taller than most people. But the director wanted Dracula to look even more intimidating and superhuman. So they made Christopher Lee wear special platform shoes with hidden lifts inside them. These lifts added several more inches to his height. Other actors on set had to look up even more to see his face. The lifts made his walk slower and more dramatic. His legs had to work harder to move around the sets. By the end of each filming day, Christopher Lee's legs were exhausted. He complained about the pain, but he kept wearing the lifts because he understood they made Dracula scarier. The lifts also made simple movements look more menacing. A simple walk across a room looked like a supernatural being gliding through space. Christopher Lee's natural height was scary enough, but those extra inches made him seem almost impossible. That wasn't just clever costume design, it was a physical choice that made the whole performance more terrifying. The actor suffered for his art, and the suffering made the movie better. Fact number 13. The female vampire was based on a real historical person. This character wasn't invented completely by the screenwriter. She was actually inspired by a real historical figure. In European history, there was a woman named Elizabeth Bathory who was believed to be a vampire, or at least someone who did vampire-like things. The screenwriter had read about her in history books and decided to create a character inspired by her legend. This character gave the story depth and made the vampire mythology feel more real. It connected the film to actual history and actual fears that people had centuries ago. Filmmakers wanted audiences to understand that vampire stories came from somewhere real, from actual events and actual people. By basing the character on real history, they made Dracula feel less like a fairy tale and more like a terrifying truth. Modern viewers often don't realize they're watching a story that connects to genuine historical mystery. The past lived again through art, and real history became part of cinema. Number 12. The film was shot in only 19 days. Dracula is a complex movie with many scenes, many locations, and many special effects. You would think it would take months and months to film, but the reality is shocking. The entire movie was filmed in only 19 days. 19 days to create a masterpiece of horror cinema. The filmmakers had to work extremely fast. The actors barely had time to rest between scenes. The crew was constantly moving, constantly setting up new shots, constantly racing against time. There were no long breaks for thinking or resting. Everyone understood the deadline and pushed themselves to their limits. This fast pace might sound negative, but it actually helped the film. The energy and urgency of the shoot transferred into the final movie. The film has a breathless quality that slower productions might never achieve. The actors' performances were fresh and powerful because they were living in this state of creative pressure. What could have been a problem actually became a strength. The short schedule forced everyone to be their absolute best. Creativity happens sometimes not when you have all the time in the world, but when you have almost no time at all. Fact number 10. Peter Cushing's wife had just passed away. Peter Cushing gave one of the most powerful performances in horror history as Professor Van Helsing. But here's a heartbreaking fact that makes his performance even more meaningful. Just before filming began, Cushing's beloved wife Helen passed away. She had been sick for a long time, and her death was devastating to him. Cushing was in deep pain and grieving when he arrived on set. Many people would have asked for time off to mourn. Many people would have been unable to work. But Cushing decided to throw himself into his work. He channeled all of his pain and loss into his character. Every scene has this incredible depth of emotion because Cushing was dealing with real grief. When he fights Dracula, there's a desperation in his movements that comes from genuine suffering. When he tries to save others, you see a man trying to save himself. His performance became a way of processing his own loss. Later, Cushing said that working on this film helped him through the darkest time of his life. The character of Van Helsing, fighting evil and trying to protect the innocent, became a reflection of Cushing's own inner struggle. That wasn't just acting, it was a man transforming his pain into art. Fact number 8. The director refused to show Dracula's face during certain scenes. You would think that showing the vampire's face clearly would be the scariest approach. But director Terence Fisher made a different choice. During key moments in the film, he deliberately kept Dracula's face in shadow or off-camera. Sometimes you would only see his hands. Sometimes you would only see his shadow. Sometimes you would only see his eyes. Fisher understood that what you don't see is scarier than what you do see. Your imagination fills in the blanks with something even more terrifying than what's actually there. When the camera finally shows Dracula's face fully, it's more shocking because you've been imagining how terrible he must look. This technique comes from something called the less is more approach to horror. Filmmakers often forget this lesson and show too much. They think showing everything will be scariest, but Fisher knew better. By hiding Dracula's face, he made audiences lean forward in their seats. He made them hold their breath, waiting to see what they knew was coming. What looked like a limitation actually became a strength. That wasn't a mistake, it was a brilliant creative choice. Fact number 7. The garden scenes were filmed in real cemeteries. When the filmmakers needed to film scenes in cemeteries and graveyards, they didn't build fake ones. They went to real cemeteries and filmed right there among real graves and real tombstones. Filming in real cemeteries created an incredible atmosphere that no fake set could match. The actors could feel the real history and real death around them. The camera picked up on this authentic energy. Real graves are older and more weathered than any prop department could create. Real tombstones have real names of real people who really died. Standing on that ground, the actors didn't have to pretend to feel scared. The fear was natural. The location itself was creepy. The production team had to get special permission to film in these places. They had to treat the graves with respect. They had to promise they wouldn't damage anything. Imagine being an actor, speaking your lines over actual graves of people who died decades or centuries ago. That's not pretend fear, that's real uneasiness. The locations made the film feel authentic and genuinely haunted. What looked like a perfectly created movie set was actually a real cemetery filled with real history. The past was literally beneath their feet while they filmed. Fact number 6. The brides of Dracula weren't supposed to be sexy. In the film, Dracula's vampire companions are portrayed in a certain way that some people found disturbing. The filmmakers were deliberately creating female vampires with a sensuality that hadn't been seen in horror films before. But this choice was controversial. Some viewers and critics complained about how the female vampires were portrayed. They said the film was mixing sexuality with horror in a way that was inappropriate for the time. The studio received letters from people who were upset about this. But the director defended his choice. He believed that vampires should be attractive and seductive, because that's part of what makes them dangerous. He understood that evil isn't always ugly. Evil can be beautiful and attractive. This debate actually changed how horror films portrayed evil. After Dracula, filmmakers realized they could make monsters that were attractive and still be terrifying. They learned that seduction is a form of danger. The controversy around this film actually helped expand what horror movies could do. What seemed like a problem at the time became a creative revolution. Sometimes the scenes that make people uncomfortable are the ones that change cinema the most. Fact number 5. Christopher Lee specifically requested the ending be changed. Christopher Lee was not just an actor on this film. He was also someone who understood storytelling deeply. After reading the script, Lee had concerns about the ending. He thought the way Dracula died was too quick and too easy. He believed that such a powerful creature should have a more dramatic and meaningful death. Lee went to the director and made his suggestions. He argued that the audience had invested so much in this terrifying vampire that they deserved a more impressive final battle. The director listened to Lee's ideas and they worked together to redesign the ending. The final version of the ending is more dramatic and more satisfying than what was originally written. Christopher Lee's input made the ending stronger. This shows that great films are often created through collaboration. Directors aren't the only creative voices. Actors can contribute to the story too. Lee understood his character so well that he could see what needed to be different. What started as a script change became one of the most memorable endings in horror cinema. Sometimes the best ideas come from the people performing the roles. Fact number 4. The film company initially didn't want to make it in color. Here's something that seems almost impossible now. The film company that produced Dracula originally wanted to make it in black and white. This was 1958, and color film technology was new and expensive. Many studios still used black and white because it was cheaper and more familiar. But someone on the team argued passionately for color. They believed that a vampire film needed color to truly terrify audiences. They fought for the extra budget and the extra technology that color required. Eventually, they won the argument. Dracula was filmed in color, and this decision changed everything. The red blood, the pale skin, the dark castle shadows, all of it depended on color. If the film had been made in black and white, it would be a completely different experience. That one decision to spend more money and use new technology created a masterpiece. Sometimes taking a risk and spending extra resources creates art that's worth far more than the money spent. The filmmakers could have taken the cheaper route, but they chose to invest in quality. That choice mattered enormously. Fact number 3. The psychological aspect was more important than special effects. While many people expected Dracula to be full of special effects and creatures, the filmmakers had a different plan. They believed that the real horror came from psychology, not from visual tricks. They focused on creating atmosphere and tension. They focused on making viewers feel watched and unsafe. They focused on the buildup of fear rather than explosive scares. There are very few real special effects in this film. What you see is mostly acting, lighting, and clever camera work. The power of the film comes from what you think is happening, not what you actually see happening. This approach was revolutionary for horror films. Many horror movies rely on jump scares and monsters, but Dracula relies on your own mind scaring you. This makes the film scarier in the long term. You can't stop thinking about it after you leave the theater. Special effects fade from memory, but psychological terror stays with you forever. The filmmakers understood that the most powerful horror weapon is imagination. They gave you pieces of a story and let your mind complete it in the scariest possible way. The film looks beautiful and has good acting, but the real genius is how it gets into your head. That wasn't just movie making, that was an understanding of how fear actually works. Fact number 2. The music was composed in only 2 weeks. The music in Dracula is incredible. It's one of the most memorable horror film scores ever created. It's dramatic and scary and beautiful, all at the same time. But here's something surprising about this amazing music. The composer only had 2 weeks to write it. 2 weeks to create all those orchestral arrangements. 2 weeks to record the entire soundtrack. 2 weeks to create something that would outlive almost everything else about the production. The composer worked under intense pressure, writing music rapidly and making decisions quickly. There was no time for second-guessing or changes. Every piece had to be recorded perfectly the first time. This pressure actually helped create something special. The music has an urgency and power that you can feel. The composer wasn't overthinking it. He was creating from pure instinct and inspiration. Modern composers often spend months on film scores. They have time to try different things and reconsider choices. But sometimes limitations create better results. The fast deadline forced the composer to trust his first instincts. The music is proof that great art can happen when there's no time to worry. Creativity and pressure created something magical. What looked like a limitation actually became a strength. Fact number 1. Dracula nearly bankrupted the studio that made it. Here's the final and most shocking fact about Dracula. The film was so expensive to make and so difficult to produce that it nearly destroyed the entire studio that made it. Hammer Films was a smaller studio without huge resources. Making Dracula pushed them to their financial limits. The studio executives were terrified that the film would be a box office failure. They worried they had spent too much money and would lose everything. Many people involved in the production believed that Dracula would be the death of Hammer Films. But something incredible happened. The film was released and became a massive success. Audiences loved it. Critics praised it. People came back to see it multiple times. The financial success of Dracula saved Hammer Films and allowed them to make many more horror films. What could have been a disaster became a triumph. The studio that almost went bankrupt became famous for making monster movies. One brave decision to make a serious horror film changed the history of an entire company. If Dracula had failed, cinema history would be completely different. That one film carried the weight of an entire studio's future on its shoulders. Bonus fact: the lost original ending. Beyond the 20 facts, there's one more story that few people know. In the original script, there was an ending that was filmed but never released. In this lost ending, Dracula didn't die the way he dies in the final film. Instead, he escaped to another country and the story continued. This alternative ending was about 30 minutes long and provided a very different conclusion to the story. The studio and director decided that this ending was too dark and too open-ended for audiences. They feared it would confuse people. So they filmed a new, more definitive ending, and the original ending was locked away. Decades later, film historians found reference to this lost ending in production records. Some of them searched for the original film footage, hoping to find what was filmed and rejected. However, the footage appears to be lost forever or deliberately destroyed. We may never know exactly what happened in that alternative ending. Film students and horror fans have spent years speculating about what that lost 30 minutes might have contained. Some believe it would have been even scarier than the released version. Others think the studio made the right choice by changing it. The mystery of the lost ending adds another layer to the legend of Dracula. Sometimes the most interesting stories about films are the ones we'll never completely know. Old techniques and new discoveries remind us that cinema history is full of mysteries waiting to be uncovered. So here we are. 20 incredible facts about Dracula, plus one bonus mystery, and we've barely scratched the surface of what makes this film so important and so strange. Dracula isn't just a movie about a vampire. It's a story about courage in the face of darkness. It's about brave people fighting evil even when they're scared. It's about how humans create meaning and protect each other from what terrifies them. Professor Van Helsing fights Dracula with knowledge and courage and determination. He shows us that we're stronger than our fears. He shows us that standing up against darkness matters, even when darkness is powerful. The making of this film was also about courage. It was about filmmakers taking risks and spending money they didn't have. It was about actors delivering powerful performances while dealing with real grief and real danger. It was about crew members working impossibly fast and still creating beauty. It was about artists using techniques from ancient theater and old silent films to create something completely new. Every person involved in making Dracula was fighting their own battles while trying to create a masterpiece. And they succeeded. If you enjoyed these stories about the strange and wonderful history of Dracula, subscribe to our channel for more. The movie hides truth and mystery beneath its surface. Every film has stories that aren't on the screen, but are just as important as what you see. We'll keep uncovering them, one story at a time. Movies are more than entertainment. They're art, and art is proof that humans create meaning from nothing. That's the real magic of cinema.